they get picked on for being not black or white, and then you become the pick because you're biracial from both sides,
Mm-hmm.
black and white.
Interestingly enough, so my story is based on the fact that I don't even find out my true parentage until I'm 18. So
18.
yes.
All right, back like we never left. This is Live from the Living Room Podcast. I am Jay Rich, and today I have a very special guest. We have a doctor. She's a mother, and now an author of Raised a Lie, Dr. Naeema Olatunji. How you doing?
Amazing. That's pretty good pronunciation.
Try to work on it. Try to work on it out of respect, you know. So, what I normally like to do is start each show as an icebreaker using problematic questions. So, first things first, being in Black History Month and the subject of your book, how do you feel about Rachel Dozing?
Um, so I would problematic questions. I love it. I think that I'm gonna plead the fifth. I don't have this really strong opinion one way or another.
Okay.
I think how we show up in the world has changed and evolved for me over time.
Okay.
And I'll be 51 in April, and I think I'd like to give as much grace as I'd like to receive.
Understood. Um, sticking with problematic questions. How many times have you had a white person talk to you unknowing that you're mixed and they try to have a conversation about black people in an unflattering way?
So that was my life growing up. Well, let me correct that. It was not my life growing up. My life growing up was this experience of not everybody just sort of looking around the elephant in the middle of the room and speaking as if there was not clearly a person of color in the room. And so in those aspects and respects, it just feels like you're invisible.
Okay.
So post my 20s, what I would say is that it happened as frequently as probably at least on a monthly basis, where there would be these situations where I would find myself feeling incredibly and increasingly more and more uncomfortable, because at that point I knew who I was, and yet I was still trying to find that space for which that fit. And because I think that I was uncomfortable in my own skin and trying to find my place, those type of situations were even more uncomfortable for me.
So what I noticed with there seems to be a pattern that seems to expose itself with a few conversations I've had with biracial people. One thing that seems to be a shift. You said in your late 20s when you noticed a shift, but most people I've talked to, they notice a shift between elementary school and I guess going into high school 10 years, whereas specifically women, they get picked on for being not black or white, and then you get the, I don't know, I guess you become the pick because you're biracial from both sides, black and white. Did you notice that only in your 20s, or was that something that occurred earlier?
So interestingly enough, so my story is based on the fact that I don't even find out my true parentage until I'm 18. So
18?
yes, so I spend my entire childhood being told that I was white and being in all white neighborhoods and all white schools, and so there's never this moment where somebody was like, sis. There's never that moment that happens for which that I am called to have this conversation. My family spent an exorbitant amount of time not having any conversations around me being of any
Family
race.
reunions, holidays.
I grew up in an all Italian family.
Okay.
We weren't having these conversations. We didn't live in communities where there were people of color. Like it just wasn't, that
Okay.
wasn't a thing. And so I always knew at a very young age, I always knew I was different. There's never this moment for which that I was like, I'm the same. But we're never having the conversations. Because we're never having the conversations, and I can only trust when I ask my mom and she says, yeah, no, it's no. That there's no other place for me personally to go. And because I didn't have other Black friends, or I wasn't in other Black people's homes, there was just never a moment for which that I was like, oh.
So when you are amongst your classmates and your peers growing up, before I guess you actually had that I guess the identity crisis, can I call it that, in your 20s?
Yeah.
Okay, so during that time before that, did you encounter people saying, "Can I touch your hair because your texture is different"? How did you respond to that?
I think it depended on the probably the time in my life.
Okay.
So I got married and became a mom when I was 23, and everything shifted as you know, like once you become a parent, things no longer become just about you, right? And because I was still a really young person, I think that there was this shift for myself where I'm no longer focusing on how I feel at any given moment. My life really just became about being somebody's mom. So in the moments if somebody said something about my hair, I don't think that there were these ill feelings about it, because then I know who I am. If that had happened at an earlier age, I was so uncomfortable being me that I think that it would have been really, really difficult.
And that discomfort, it extended beyond the normal teenage angst of like transforming from a young adult to a woman.
100%.
You just didn't have clarification on what it was until, was it just a, can you tell us about the day that you found out and everything kind of made sense and all the dots were connected?
So there's never this moment where all the dots are connected. There's just never that time in my life.
Okay.
But it's something that I write extensively about in my book, where there's this revelation, and my mom is forced to have a conversation with me.
Okay.
I don't think that she had ever intended on it. And because again, as I said earlier, there were moments that I was like, Ma, right? And she never, I don't believe, ever felt like she could have the conversation.
Was
I
it a
don't
moment
know.
of denial?
You know,
She didn't know how to handle it?
I jokingly say that Italians do denial better than anybody I know. So I don't know. It's interesting. So having written this book, and I've had all of these conversations now with people, and family secrets, I think that it transcends all nationalities, all
Absolutely.
race, right? Yeah. It is prevalent where people have shame around maybe decisions that they've made, or maybe that there is something that they're afraid that might come to the light. And for me, it became very cathartic writing about what that process was. My mother has been deceased for a decade now, so there's not these moments, even in writing. I started thinking about things and thinking, gosh, I wish I could have a conversation with her now about, more questions that I had. But her revelation it opened the door for many more questions. She just wasn't ready to have that conversation. And my
Was it
mother
because
was a matriarch, so when Sandy said no, that it was a no. The
Yeah.
subject closed. Right.
Do you think it was just she didn't know how to articulate herself, or there were questions that she just wasn't prepared to answer, and she never? It was like, okay, we'll do it in the future, and then the future never came.
I think it's a great question. I almost wonder. I cannot tell you for sure.
Okay.
We never had that conversation, but what I can say is that I was born in the first part of 1971. There is certainly an energy about where the world was,
Right.
and in her family, she knew and understood exactly where her parents' ideologies and philosophies as it applied to race were. And I just don't think that she felt like she could have those honest conversations. I'm often curious about what, if anything, was ever discussed outside of my earshot.
What about your other siblings?
Blonde hair, blue eyed.
So, in the first chapter I read, you tell a story in which you come to this realization, or not realization, but someone ridicules you for having dirty skin. Can you tell the listeners about that?
So I have my sister is 7 years my senior, and my earliest memories are when I am around 3 years old, and it's of her torment of me. I am her target. My younger brother has not been born yet, and I am the only one that we lived on this very rural farm. So there is nobody else around, save for we have two boy cousins, but they're a little weird, so we don't play with them very much. And so it's just her and I. And we live in a very dysfunctional house. And I think that all of her angst is laser focused at me, because she's powerless to change our living environment. And so I can say as an adult that all of her emotions that she didn't know what to do with, she targeted at me. But as a child, I could not tell you why that she was so awful to me.
As an adult, and you look back on your childhood years, and obviously you spoke on different families have different relationships, and along with different secrets. Do you think at times do you kind of waffle between it was normal sibling ribbing versus it was actual hatred? Because older siblings, younger siblings, they always fight, and it can become very catty, and then they basically pick on a weakness or difference, and they point that out, and they hammer that thing home, and becomes an insecurity. So, with that being said, do you think it's a little bit of sibling rivalry in a traditional sense? It was just a very unique situation, or do you think it was something deeper than that?
I think for my sister that she never grew out of. So it's a great question, and I'm not 100% sure that as a child, I know that I could not have differentiated.
Right.
I did know that she didn't treat anybody else like that. So fast forward some years, and we relocate to Southern California, and now I have other cousins that are closer to my age, and that she never treats that way. And I know that I am being singled out. I would not have called it hatred, because I idolized my sister, and all I ever wanted was for her to love and accept me, right? And I followed her around everywhere, and that was always sort of the hope that one day it's going to turn around, one day that I am going to be good enough. And I internalized all of her hateful words, And never did I once think it was her. I always thought it was me because I couldn't refute the things that she said. She would say that my skin was dirty and everything. When you live on a farm, there are lots of, I think there's everything that's dirty. And when things are dirty, they're
I grew
brown.
up in the country. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're brown. I'm the only brown skinned person in my family.
Right.
So there was no concept in my very young brain to think, to question her, right? Like I didn't know that
It's
that
so
what
hard
she
to
said
it's
were
so hard
lies.
to question people with logic when you have so much admiration for them.
Right.
Where does your relationship stand with her now?